Ryan Croft, few people have a background as diverse at the intersection of baseball and tech, from scouting baseball talent in the Dominican Republic to founding multiple tech companies. In 2013, Ryan co-founded Transit Screen, a mobility data platform that scaled across 40-plus cities in the United States. Now he's back in the founder seat, building Pacto, an enterprise fintech startup in Mexico with backing from Dilla Capital, FEMSA Ventures, 500 Global, and several other prominent investors. In our conversation, we'll explore the parallels between baseball scouting and startups, the challenges of building a company in Mexico as a foreigner, what it's like to be a second-time founder, what's easier, harder, and why he wanted to build another company, and much more. Thanks for coming today, Ryan.
And thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. I appreciate the invite.
Yes. No, I think there's very few people that I've come across that have similar interests and background and hobbies. So I think this is going to be really fun to dive into and so forth. But first off, if you kind of want to start off with, where you're from, kind of background on where you went to high school, college, and so forth, and then we'll kind of jump right into scouting in the Dominican Republic.
Listen, that sounds great. So I'm from the Washington, D.C. suburbs and went to James Madison University and had a degree in international business and Latin American studies. So when I was in school, I lived in Spain and did a summer abroad, and I really got this itch to live overseas. And that kind of kicked off my career of living, working, traveling overseas, and particularly in Latin America.
And for you, if I recall, from our intro a few months ago and meeting you, baseball was never really something that you enjoyed early on. I think it was lacrosse. How did you find your way into having interest in baseball?
Yeah, I loved baseball growing up, but I was more, drawn in college. I played club lacrosse at James Madison, and I was a basketball player. But right after school, I graduated and went directly down to the Dominican Republic, not really even knowing much about the island beyond, beautiful beaches and vacations in Punta Cana. But I moved down to volunteer at an orphanage and sort of teach English. That was really my plan at 21, right, fresh out of school. And I lived with an embassy family, a family friend, and immediately just was drawn to the passion and religion that is baseball. I had the chance early on to meet Sammy Sosa and some other greats just in passing. And, it is such an incredible sport, and it's a passion for everyone that lives there. I was pulled in, and immediately I started to look for ways that I can start a business, or how can I somehow get involved with baseball? And that's really how it all began.
So you find your way down there, and you have some connections in the sense of you're teaching English, you're with this family that's part of the embassy of sort, but finding a way into the baseball world, as I know and it's not that straightforward. Oh, I like this world. How did you start scouting?
Yeah, let me set the stage or paint the picture for you. It's 2006, 2007. You're looking at the Dominican Republic, which is a little bit of the wild, wild west, right? This is before Major League Baseball came in and established a lot of the protocols and the requirements for international signings. So it really kind of looked like a bunch of agents running around the island, literally all over every corner of this island, looking for the next great Pedro Martinez, next Manny Ramirez, and Juan Marichal. And I noticed that. I used to had a small little Toyota Corolla, Toyota Camry, and a red car. I used to drive all over the country. And once you meet a couple people, then that sort of spreads out to another 10 people, another 10 people. And then I became known on the island as like the gringo who represents baseball players. And it started as simple as that. And by the end, I was leading groups of people, of prospects to go try out for world beating teams like the Yankees, the Dodgers, the Cubs, and had the chance to meet some real iconic coaches and players in the process. And, just as this 20-something American down there, trying to find my way.
And I take it at the time, obviously you're teaching English, so your Spanish was pretty proficient, but it got very good quickly, right?
Yeah, look, I mean, you can take as many classes as you can possibly imagine, go on Duolingo or whatever, but nothing replaces being the only person who speaks English in a city. I was in Santo Domingo. I lived there, and there was nobody around me that I would interact with on a daily basis that spoke anything but Spanish. So you're forced into it, force-fed Spanish, and it was a way to really learn the language and the culture quickly. And I was the type of person who wanted to assimilate and I looked and felt Dominican when I was there. And I think that the prospects appreciated that. But I sort of had this, U.S. mentality and mindset, and I would represent the players and try to negotiate the contracts. And, I didn't know what I was doing. The reality is I made every mistake in the book. I remember one example, it was like a legendary Dodgers scout who I brought, this amazing 5-tool player and said, this guy's going to be the next Sammy Sosa, Alfonso Soriano. He's like, sure, and my expectations for what he was going to sign for were up here. His expectations were down here. There's an early lesson in market demand, and that you really have to know your product and really know the market before you go telling a legend what to do.
Yeah, and kind of off that, I think there's something I wanted to ask you. Like, when you started scouting, you kind of knew the basic metrics. There's like the speed, power, how hard someone throws. But back in '06, it's changed a lot now, but back in '06, what was it like there? And I can't imagine '06 back in the Dominican. Like, were there radar guns? Like, what was going on and so forth?
Yeah, this really makes me feel old. But if you think about it, it's before the iPhone, it was before social media, it was before even like video camera phones. So I remember I used to keep a little like notebook of all the players, and I would type it out and then print it at like the local print shop, and it'd be like their name, where they're from, all of their 5-tool data, speed, how fast they would run in like a 40-yard dash. And then I would present that when I went to the tryouts, and they're like, great, this scouts would look at it. There's nothing digital. It was, email was in its earliest stages. We had email, but it wasn't really used too frequently. It was before WhatsApp. Now everything I do,
email here was barely used. Imagine email in the Dominican.
Definitely. So it was the wild, wild west in every sense of the word. Communication was really poor. It was before Google Maps. So I was literally trying to figure out just how to get around this island. It was really poorly paved roads. If you go to the Dominican now, it's amazing how many highways there are. You can get across the country from one side to the other in like 2-3 hours. I feel so old saying this, but it would take me like 6 or 8 hours to get from one side to the other side of the island for tryouts at times. So, but then again, that's where the opportunity was, because you've got this incredible sort of like pile of talent and strong base of players, and they all needed a home. And, you've seen the growth over time. It's one of the most densely populated talent pools in the world for any occupation. Yeah, and I remember at the time that the stat that everyone would say was 31 out of 32 teams had an academy, a physical presence in the DR, which is crazy for an island at the time of 8 million people. And that's a major investment, right? And it's a local business that you're running. And then if you counted the Dominican summer leagues and the Dominican minor leagues, something like 30 or 40% of all pro players that are being paid to play were Dominican.
Yes.
Dominican. So it's just one of those real anomalies almost. It's an outlier of talent per capita.
Yeah,
sure.
It's truly a pipeline. And to make it very clear, 10% of Major League players are from the Dominican, and you're 8 times more likely to face a pitcher from the Dominican than the U.S. that's U.S. born, which is wild. The pitchers, I always joke, like if you play in the minor leagues or go to a minor league academy, I swear, if you look at the pitchers that are down there, it's over half from Latin America. And these kids range from like 16 to 25, and they throw bullets.
Yeah, no, I remember being, at the Mets. The Mets is one that I specifically remember seeing some of these pitchers, 16 to 18 years old, throwing 98 miles per hour. And just like my mind was blown. Like, how is that even possible?
So just to kind of full circle here, from that experience, what were some of the lessons you took kind of going forward when it comes to competition, long-term bets, development, as you started to kind of pursue a career in technology?
Yeah, I think number one is it was basically like a startup, right? I was operating a company that didn't exist. I created it out of thin air, and I was, up against all odds. I remember thinking, I'm 30 years younger than all these Dominican guys that are, fighting for the best talent and signing the best players. I have no experience doing this. It's almost some hubris that I even believe that I can be successful in this, and, not being afraid to fail. Not being afraid to try something new, stick your head out there and just give it a shot. The cards are stacked against me. And then at the end of the day, I think the number one sort of parallel that I draw to startups is that quality and success takes time. It's never an overnight success. They don't call it the farm leagues for nothing. Like, it takes a long time for the average player, even the best player, to go from, swinging a bat on a field in the Dominican Republic to being on the bright lights in the summer and Major League Baseball. In the best possible scenario, that could be 5 or 6 years, and the average person's never going to make the pros. So I think it was an early lesson in time, in that really it takes time to build something of value, and it's better to have a long-term mindset than just a quick flip kind of mentality.
And it's also, that time kind of prioritizes relationships. And you'll probably point this out later. Like as I've gotten older, you realize like everything's relationship based. Who wants to trust somebody? Who wants to work with someone? It's all relationships, and relationships don't happen overnight.
Yeah, you could take 10 years to develop a great relationship and one day to ruin it. So I live by that motto of never burn a bridge and try to have a long-term mentality with people.
Now, as we transition into Transit Screen and this amazing company you built with a few of your co-founders, do you want to kind of start with the inception story, and then as you progressed across almost 40 plus cities, I think, if I'm right?
Yeah. So, right after I left the Dominican Republic, I decided to start an adventure travel and tours company. So for 5 years, between starting Transit Screen, my first startup, I had a services company, and the service was providing a really local experience for people who want to go to Brazil, Chile, Nicaragua, Panama, Mexico. And that was a company that I owned and operated and really had a chance in my 20s to see the world. I wouldn't give it back for anything. I was able to really refine my Spanish and see the world, meet a lot of interesting people. Generally, the trips I would lead were anywhere from 5 to 20 people. And usually it had some kind of physical or knowledge-based component. So yoga retreats or fishing or scuba diving, scuba dive certifications, surf retreats, kite surfing. Some were for corporations, some were for groups of people, but it was a great experience in your 20s, travel the world, see the world, and get paid to do it. So that was until I was in my late 20s. And then I met my co-founder in Washington, D.C., and had the chance to start my first technology startup and moved to San Francisco to kick it off.
That's kind of crazy, like in the sense of scouting baseball players, but then there's probably some parallel, right? So, okay, I have this kind of built up a network. I know where to eat, I know where to stay, but maybe it's easier to monetize like trips quickly instead of chasing, the next Alfonso Soriano.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was more opportunistic that I had a network of people who saw me living in the Dominican Republic. This is before Instagram, before, social media, but they had heard that I was living on an island and they wanted to go. They wanted that local person to show them around and have a great vacation. So I developed kind of a pipeline of folks that wanted to have these experiential trips, had maybe 80 or 100 people visit in those 2 years. And then those people became kind of the core of, they paid me to travel with them around Latin America for 5 years. And it was a great lifestyle business and kind of prepared me to how to start a business, how to accept payment, how to create a website, how to do email marketing for the first time. And it was sort of like the foundation for building something bigger and a bigger challenge.
So you moved to DC and then you come out to SF.
Where you're from as well. Yeah.
Yes, that's where I'm from. Yes, exactly. I met my girlfriend at the time, now my wife, in San Francisco. And it can be overwhelming as a foreigner. I've experienced it with my wife, Aida. It's a lot, right? For you, when you moved out, did you know what the idea was, or I want to build a startup?
Yeah. So I met my co-founder at a startup event in Washington, D.C. in 2012 into 2013 and moved to San Francisco for the business. And the idea was really simple. It was a spin out of a government program, actually, in Arlington, Virginia, which is people are moving into cities. It's urbanizing. People are realizing that they don't need to live maybe a family with 3 cars or 2 cars. Maybe you can live no cars. But really the challenge was always at that time, when is a train coming? Are there buses here? And when do they pick up? Like, it was always very much a mystery. And then we really benefited at this time, 2013 to 2016 in particular. Uber launched, Lyft, bike share, car share, like Zipcar, those kind of companies, Car2Go. And then the scooter boom happened, like electric scooters. And we were the central nervous system of all this data. So we were the first to come along and say, aggregate this data like a city mapper or move it, but for corporations. And we did it for large real estate companies and put it in lobbies of buildings on screens. And then we had a mobile app that was more for, Google Maps for a large company like Google.
Wow. So safe to say the timing was pretty impeccable in the sense of accessibility and mobility was kind of coming to the forefront, but also mobile penetration was like very clear, like 2012. By then, everybody was using some type of smartphone in the US at least. So it seemed like timing was very vital to this endeavor as well.
Definitely. In the early days, our core product and the product market fit we had was big real estate developers didn't want to build new parking. They didn't want to build expensive parking in new developments. So I went all around the country and met with local departments of transportation, departments of planning, and building codes. And I was putting Transit Screen, asking them to put Transit Screen in the building code. So if any new building went up, a residential high rise or a hotel or a commercial office building, as part of their zoning approval, they would agree to put it in the lobby. And this was hundreds of locations and then eventually 1,000 to 2,000 locations all over the country. So any crane in the air in Seattle, Boston, Cambridge, LA, DC, more than likely was going to have a transit screen in the lobby when that building delivered. So I think, yeah, timing was definitely a piece of it, and just hustle and grit and getting in front of. It was sort of it was a nice to have for some, and it was an amenity. And for others, it was a requirement. So when you're required to put something in, they have less price sensitivity, and they're more likely to put it in, and just whatever our next development is, put it in. So we really benefited from that sort of zoning approval.
What was the experience like getting this zoning and the government to kind of come onto your side? You hear too often the opposite.
Definitely. I think we had some really good mentors early on in the city, the District of Columbia and Arlington County, and the people that a lot of times there's like 2 or 3 jurisdictions that sort of set the code that the other places like Palo Alto or Bellevue, Washington, Seattle. If you get in with some large cities and you're in the zoning requirements, others kind of piggyback off of the language. And I think we're just right place, right time, had the right mentors, and we were really live and up and running in some real influential early adopter cities. I think at some point we were in the zoning requirements of multiple dozen, probably 30 plus cities around the country. So that was just like a steady pipeline. And oftentimes it was written in, it would just say transit screen, because nobody knew, what is it, a real-time transportation information kiosk or dashboard? But we were the name. We were the sort of the trademark of what people needed to put in the lobby, and we grew as a result.
What was the biggest challenge? So we've been talking about the great part of this. What was the hardest part of you kind of scaling this across multiple cities?
Yeah, I think the good news is we won the market. We were really like the name. We were like the Kleenex of the category. I think the hardest part is that it's not a very big market, and that I think there's 5,000 to 10,000 buildings of sufficient size in major cities. So transit screen makes perfect sense if you're in downtown Boston, or you're, just over the river of Seattle, over the Sound, and you're in Bellevue, Washington. But if you're in, rural Iowa, it's not going to work in a two-story building. That's where we really started to kind of branch out and think of it more holistically as we're a commuter benefit product that's really beneficial for large Fortune 500 corporations. And then by the end, a large bit of our revenue came from Fortune 500s who are looking to give information and tools to their employees. And you know it as well as anyone in the Bay Area. You have these commuter shuttles, and they're still running up and down the highways between Silicon Valley and San Francisco where people live. But oftentimes they're very siloed, that you might have an app that says, all right, my Apple shuttle's coming in 12 minutes, but what if you're not going to take that and you're going to hop on the bus instead or get on Caltrain? We're really a multimodal option for corporations, and that's, I think, the edge that helped us win.
And the monetization model, was it pretty straightforward, like some type of one-time payment and like a recurring SaaS fee or maintenance fee?
Yeah, it was just a monthly or annual subscription fee. We sort of positioned ourselves as a utility for the building, and you're going to pay internet, you're going to pay electricity and plumbing and water. And for us, we felt like the transit screen should just be a fundamental utility in the building as well. And I think it was priced at the right point where it's not going to break the bank for a large real estate developer, but it's enough to really build a good business that we could scale off of and benefit from.
When you look back, what was the biggest mistake if you had to do something different?
Yeah, I think more than anything else, that transition to the corporate workplace took a little bit longer than maybe I wish in hindsight. There's a huge market there, and maybe unsexy market of commuter transportation. And I sat on the board of the organization that sort of oversaw that association. And I think that if we would have seen this writing on the wall, that the number of buildings that require the physical screen would not be endless, that we would have made a move a little bit more to be, an Eden Red type of commuter benefit earlier on, and expand the aperture of the amount of products that we can offer earlier. But ultimately, I think, as I said before, great news is we really won the market. We were the number one player. The bad news is that market for physical screens and buildings was just small. It wasn't $1 billion outcome.
So as you kind of transitioned out, what was one of the biggest takeaways, and how did you land on building a fintech in Mexico?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think like anybody, I was 7 years in, and I was able to participate in the secondary exit. I transitioned to the board for 2 years, and I was really excited to to try something new. So I was approached by Georgetown University to join as an entrepreneur in residence. It really scratched the itch for me to still work in startups and have that sort of passion met. But I really over and over went back to, I got to do this again. I feel like I got a taste of small bit of success, but I really want to go after a bigger problem and a bigger addressable market. As we talked about before, the building market is just not big enough. Like Transit Screen, it didn't have the potential to be that $1 billion exit until, unless we really changed the product suite. So I started traveling again, went down to Mexico City, met with a bunch of companies. I made about a dozen angel investments, and I was really pulled back down to Latin America and said, this is where the innovation is. This is where the opportunity to really see that growth is. And, I was noticing all of the success of Square and Toast and these kind of companies in the US. My office in San Francisco was across the street from Square, and had some friends there and visited the office and was always very infatuated with their business model. And I felt building the next Square for Latin America was going to be my next challenge.
If you want to take us through, so is that the inception story of Pacto is the vision of being Square for LATAM, and take us to the last couple of years and to today is that still the vision?
Definitely. So yeah, originally it was this Toast for Latin America, Square for Latin America story. And my co-founder and I went down, when he was still working in big tech, and we sat at a restaurant, an amazing restaurant called Lardo, if anyone's been in Condesa. And we're sitting there and watching this amazing food go by, incredible bakery, great mixed drinks. And then we looked behind the counter, and the point of sale looked like it was something from like 1994. And we thought to ourselves, how is that possible? What is the problem? What is the disconnect here from what we see in DC, New York, San Francisco, et cetera, and the modern tools that restaurants have? Why couldn't a restaurant like this with incredible service, incredible food have that? And that was the thesis for the original go-to-market.
And for you guys, or I should say yourself, and I can refer to your co-founding team as well, being a second-time founder, you have the idea. How was the fundraising process? Was it easier second time around? Maybe give like one takeaway or insight that you would tell a first-time founder now that you've done it twice.
Yeah, it's a completely different world. I remember raising capital, just trying anything, anyone, meeting anyone, having really no clue who to talk to, how VC worked, how startups, the scale, how do you scale? And I think the second time around, you just have perfect perspective in terms of the do's and don'ts. I think my success rate for pitching in my first business was somewhere around 5%. And then I remember having a similar path and a similar sort of strategy. In the second time around, it was closer to 40 or 50% success rate. So I think there's an element that it was a pretty frothy time in venture. This is 2021, where it was the peak of the fundraise sort of boom. And then I think we also had a pretty compelling story, and we felt like we were the ones to solve this problem. And you could probably feel that passion come through in any pitch that we gave. So I think it was a combination of the market and the passion that we had and the team that we'd assembled. And, we really felt like we were placed on this earth to build Toast or Square for Latin America.
Yeah. And as you start kind of building this kind of initial concept of Pacto, what was the biggest difference? And I say this from the lens of a foreigner, right? From the regulatory, operational, cultural, even the bureaucracy that you started to see. And was that easy to overcome? How did you navigate this?
Yeah, they're totally different markets. And I have, the benefit of perspective, having spent 4 years just about in operating a business overseas. And there's so many different differences that there's not enough time to name them all. It's a complex place to do business. There's regulatory complexities. It's also a very face-to-face and very hierarchical society. When you're dealing with a large business, we work with a lot of very large banks. The structure of the organization is so different than what I was used to selling into technology companies and real estate firms and Fortune 500s per se in the US. I think it's very vertical. In other words, like the power and decision-making is consolidated at the top. And I also think that, to stave off corruption, it seems like there's a lot more red tape and bureaucracy with enterprise. When you're selling to SMBs, totally different ballgame. Small merchants, our original go-to-market was just getting into every coffee shop and every taqueria that you've seen in Mexico City, just operating at such thin margins. The churn rate of those businesses is high. There's a lot of sort of complexities in that. The cash component is real. And that was always kind of a risk that this is a place that's, 70% of transactions are in cash. And we really, naively or not, felt like we could be part of the change. And I think my sort of observation in retrospect is that there's some entrenched cultural things going on in Mexico that are hard to change. But I wouldn't trade it, this experience for anything. I think what we're building is really special, and we've been able to hire incredible people, and we work with great clients.
Yeah. And for you, like, there's a lot of points there that are interesting, but I'm going to be very direct with one question. How has Ryan's leadership style changed from his first venture and Scream to now? Are you faster to fire? Are you just a better leader? What do you think?
Yeah, I think they're totally different. And COVID sort of flipped management on its head for me in the sense that remote work has become so common. We started the business remote. So really we were default, like everybody's working where you are. There's no office. And I think that transition from everybody's in the office, you see people face to face, that's my style. I'm much more of an extrovert. I'm not going to lie. I've struggled with the remote work type of atmosphere and environment because I like to see people every day, and not living in Mexico City. It has its pros and cons. I get to see what's coming, access to capital here, access to talent in the US, and see the technology every day. That's the future. And then also every few weeks come down and get in the element in person. I think that's been beneficial, but I struggle with not being around my team always at all times.
What's been the biggest surprise in the Mexican market from scaling a team that maybe you didn't think before? Talent-wise, drive?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of surprises, I'd say, just in like really getting into a business and scaling from 0 to say 40, 50 people. I think number one is maybe the amount of regulatory red tape that you have to abide by. You just don't know until you get into it, but there's so many taxes and benefits that, it starts to add up. I think you look at, well, maybe there's some potential for labor arbitrage and that, they're lower cost labor potentially for the same roles, but actually you add up everything. I don't think the benefit really is as great as you think. And the other thing is the foreign exchange rate fluctuation. So where, you think you're benefiting by raising capital in US dollars and then deploying it in Mexican pesos. But the reality is if the dollar falls to the peso, you're in for some pain. So we had that happen a couple of times in both directions where you're constantly playing this FX game. And even like politically, having a new president come in and what kind of risk that could or could not have or opportunities, it's just things that you don't necessarily think of when you start this company and that kind of you take for granted. The rule of law in the US and foreign exchange isn't really on your mind, but it's something you have to think about and really have to plan and strategize for when you're operating a multinational company.
Would you say, putting aside the costs and the ease of hiring, productivity ends up being a primary factor of hiring, maybe not just so much the cost of this person versus that person?
Yeah, I think we as a team have been able to read, interviews and read candidates better. And I think one of the main sort of pitfalls that I see a lot of young entrepreneurs make is you just raise some capital, go hire right away. Maybe not the right choice. Think about your needs and find product market fit. And I would hire after you found product market fit. And then 2, super important is don't hire just off of the sexy names on a resume. I really think it's the person. I would much rather take that person who's got grit, they're a positive attitude, they're a hard worker, they want to run through a wall and they will have something to prove and has no logos on their resume, and the person who's, every accolade from, the McKinseys and the Stanfords of the world, no disrespect there, just simply saying, I want the person that wants it. I want the person that's willing to put in the work, because that's what is really going to drive you through the highs and lows and get you through the hard times.
And in an interview, that's sometimes hard to figure out. So is there like a couple, like 1 or 2 questions or a mentality you look for? Because people can put on a good front.
Yeah, it's a hard thing. And I think it's part data driven and sort of pattern recognition and pattern matching. And part of it's just intuition. But I agree. I mean, we've been wrong many times in this evaluation, but I think we're getting wrong less often now based with the benefit of hindsight.
So last 2 questions for Pacto. What's coming next? What are you most excited about? And if, you were to see yourself or the team in 2 years, what would be a goal for you?
Yeah, I mean, we still are very focused on this restaurant point of sale business. We've also sort of expanded our offerings and our product suite a lot more in this sort of enterprise B2B fintech. And, we're working with some of the largest banks in the world, those that are operating in Mexico, and helping them build digital tools and get to market. So I think what it looks like is still serving the small merchants, still serving that taqueria owner or the person who has that incredible coffee shop on Avenida Amsterdam or in the middle of Puebla. But this time it's more through the bank. So we provide a suite of products to the bank that then they bundle and then provide as part of many things that they offer these small merchants. So for us, it's still the same mission as day one, which is help merchants digitize and try to drive the cashless economy, because we think that's important for doing business above board and for economic prosperity, is to get away from just cash. Everything's cash and paper. We want to digitize small merchants, and we found that one way to get there faster and scale is through the banks. So one major unlock is this new sort of B2B fintech arm of the business, and we're very excited about that. I think, moving beyond, say, call it 1 to 3 year time frame, we will be moving to other markets outside of Mexico with these banks and starting to bring the impact, hopefully, to other places in Latin America or even maybe in Europe.
Awesome. Ryan, that's it. I appreciate everything. Reach out whenever. That's a wrap on this episode of Cut the Check, presented by VCMX. If you enjoyed this conversation, I would really appreciate it if you subscribed and leave a review. It really helps more founders and investors discover the show. You can find me on LinkedIn at MacMeyer or check out my website at macmeyer.com for more insights on